Hello there, my name is Anne McNabb and I'm going to be 53 tomorrow and I live in Edinburgh in Scotland. And the reason I'm making this video is the fact that it's my birthday tomorrow reminded me that it's just under a year now since I developed tinnitus. And it's been an interesting year, and I wanted to share that in a video because when I first got tinnitus, I looked around YouTube quite a lot for support videos and other people's experiences, and I wouldn't say that I found anything overly positive, and I found that really quite difficult. And so here I am nearly a year on, and yes, I'd rather I didn't have tinnitus, and yes, I've been to some pretty bad places emotionally with it, but actually I'm okay. And I wanted to share some of my experience and the things that I've done and how they've worked for me with other people, just in case you find it helpful too. So the story begins probably 2 years ago, because 2 years ago my youngest child, my daughter, who's now 20, became ill. And the next year, up until just before I developed tinnitus, was a difficult journey of illness, and eventually she was diagnosed with a chronic health condition, one that's not going to go away. And it was not long after that diagnosis, probably a week or two, that I noticed when I was drinking a glass of wine that there was a lot of ringing in my ears when I drank any wine, but that didn't stop me. I kept going with the wine. And then one night in mid-July last year, the ringing didn't go away. And I woke up in the morning and the ringing hadn't gone away. And a week or two later, I went to the doctors because the ringing hadn't gone away and they couldn't see anything in my ears or whatever. And it was a young doctor, newly qualified, and she pretty much bluntly said, "Have you ever heard of tinnitus? That's what you've got," and printed out a leaflet and sent me away. And well, I would like to say to any doctors watching this, please don't underestimate what an enormous thing that is, because I had heard of tinnitus and I knew that it's a lifelong condition. And given that the year that I'd just had and the situation I was in, it was at the time, makes me tearful thinking about it now, it was at the time quite a blow to have something like that added on top of everything else. And so my journey began, and the first thing that happened was I got a phone call later on that day from the same doctor who, because she was newly qualified, had run my situation past a more experienced doctor. And because the tinnitus certainly then was in only one ear, and is now still mostly in one ear, but then it was only in one ear, I got referred pretty quickly to audiology. And the reason for that, I discovered afterwards, was that sometimes they do get worried if your tinnitus is in one ear, that there's some kind of very rare tumour, so don't panic. It is something they can do something about, but obviously they don't want you to have a tumour. So if you've got it in one ear, you get referred to audiology, and so they can check for that. And my first tip actually would be get referred to audiology. Whether you've got it in one ear or 2 ears, get referred to audiology. Because I then spent the next probably 3 or 4 weeks waiting for that appointment in a terrible state. So I was dealing with my daughter's diagnosis and all the emotions around that. And then the sound that just wouldn't go away. And trust me, if you're watching this because you've just developed tinnitus, I understand the enormity of the thought that that sound might not go away, probably won't go away if I'm honest, and how you just feel like you can't live like that. And it was not long after that, actually maybe 2 months later, that I saw in the news somewhere that a man, an executive in a large organisation, had actually killed himself after 6 weeks of having tinnitus because he thought he couldn't live with it. And I can understand that too. I was in a very dark place for a while, and I would never have killed myself, I don't think, but mostly because I wouldn't ever do anything. My daughter needs me in particular, as well as my family. That kept me going, but I can understand that it would take you, and did take me, to very dark places. But don't despair, because it won't always be like that. It doesn't have to be like that. And the first thing I have to say in doing that is, it is still there completely, but look at me. I'm fine. So I'm going to tell you the journey. I spent those weeks between the doctor's appointment and audiology being extremely upset because of the two factors that were going on in my ears and my daughter. And then I went to audiology and I had to fill in a form about how I was feeling about my tinnitus, and well, the woman was very shocked and very concerned, and I explained to her that the two things were wrapped up together, that we couldn't separate how I felt about my daughter, but I was very in a bad place. And she was the first wonderful thing that happened to me. So this was at the Audiology Centre in Lawson Place in Edinburgh. I can't remember her name now, but she was wonderful. And she said to me, she looked me in the eye and went, "It will not always be like this." And she was the first person I believed, because she seemed so sure. So the first thing she did, apart from telling me I didn't have the tumour thing, which was great, was she tested my hearing. And for me, there has been no hearing damage yet, and I don't know if there ever will be, but that was good news. It feels like there's hearing damage because obviously you can't quite hear as clearly with this other noise, but I could hear in the tests, I could hear to normal levels, so that was good. But the most important thing she did was get me one of these. Now, you can see that I'm not actually wearing it because I no longer wear it during the day, which is a very good sign as well, even though I think the tinnitus is just as loud, if not louder. But this looks like a hearing aid, and it is, to all intents and purposes, a hearing aid, but it was developed in terms of the sound that comes out of it, especially for me. So I went in, was given this, and you can see in my ear that you really, really can hardly see it. So if anybody's worried about how it looks, I mean, I challenge you to see that. So it's so small. But what this does for me is play a low-level buzzing sound into my ear, which at that stage was very important. It's a nicer sound than the sound that I have in my tinnitus, and my brain kind of tuned into it instead of the tinnitus, and that they'll tell you a lot more about it at the hospital, but that really helps. The other thing I meant to say is there's also a website, so I find it helpful to try and explain to people who don't understand what my tinnitus sounds like. And there's a website that is www.hearing.nih.ac.uk/something. But if you put into Facebook examples, tinnitus hearing, what's that noise? As you can see, I can still hear stuff. There's roadworks outside. You get this website. And the reason this website was so good was it allows me to explain to people what my hearing sounds like, so what tinnitus sounds like for me. So there are 11 sounds, and this is the one that's closest to mine. I'm not sure where the microphone is on this, but hopefully you can hear that well enough. And it is, to be honest with you, it is quite a loud sound for me, and that's not far off the level. It's very loud. And it's not a nice sound, so I know that other people have slightly more pleasant sounds, but it doesn't make it any easier to live with. So, anyway, I got this hearing thing and wore it for a while, thinking, how can that ever make any difference to my experience? But actually it did. The other thing I did was troll YouTube, etc. And like I mentioned earlier, didn't see anything particularly useful, but there was a couple of things in there around, well, one statement that stands with me, and I would say this to you because it helped me hugely, was, well, two things actually. One was, there are lots of sounds around you all the time that you don't listen to, and you're just not aware of them because you're not tuned into them. So there's a lot of background noise going on, and tinnitus can become like that. Now, I didn't believe it, and my tinnitus is very loud and high-pitched, but it's absolutely true. I wouldn't say that's the case at night time, but I'll give you more tips for night time. But during the day, that's absolutely true. So knowing that and believing that really helped me. I had a friend who used to live near the airport, and I know that after a while she didn't hear the planes. I once had a flat near the train line, and I also, after a while, didn't hear the trains. So think about that, like that way about tinnitus, and it can be true, I promise you. The other thing that I saw in one of those videos that I watched was every time you're upset about your tinnitus, now maybe not at the beginning because you tune into it 24/7 at the beginning, but after a little while you'll find there are tiny gaps where you don't notice it. And then what you do is you go, oh, there it is. And you go like, oh no, there it is. And actually a much better mindset is, oh, there it is. I wish I didn't have it. But that does mean that I wasn't hearing it for a while. The very fact that I've just reminded myself about it means that for a bit I wasn't thinking about it. I found that approach tremendously helpful. And again, when I was listening to somebody like me giving that advice, I thought, what? But actually, I found it really useful. So the other thing I did was I found in all my investigations around tinnitus, I found this chap here. His name is Julian Kylin Hill. And Julian Cowan Hill has a lot of videos on YouTube about tinnitus, various stages of it, and I would recommend that you listen to them. Even if you, he's a craniosacral practitioner. He's not a doctor or anything like that, but he has a lot of experience of tinnitus himself, and he works with people with tinnitus. So he doesn't have kind of medical qualifications, if you like, but by golly, I found his stuff useful. In particular, though, this is his self-published book that I ordered off Amazon, and it so helped me. And in particular, he has a page at the very beginning here where he talks about the various stages of tinnitus that you will go through. And as you go up from the red stage to the purple stage, he starts at stuck, which is tinnitus feels like a tyrant. You feel hopeless, that there's no way out, and you're totally at the mercy of it. Then you go to struggling with it, which means you're bossed about by it, frustrated with emotional struggle and relentlessness, and I can relate to all of this. And it goes through various stages: resigned, motivated, letting go, empowered, and liberated. Now, it's a year on, and I can't quite believe what I'm saying here, but I'm on level 5 or 6, I would say, which is between letting go, which is your tinnitus reflects the way you feel inside, and it's a reflection of how well I'm looking after myself. And 6, which he describes as friend, where tinnitus helps you look after yourself and is a positive, reliable influence. I can't believe I'm saying this, but this is true. Now, I wish I didn't have tinnitus to teach me this, but my tinnitus gets worse when I'm overworked, stressed, when I eat the wrong foods, when I don't get enough sleep. It actually is a monitor of my health. Now, it never goes away, but even at its worst, I can live with it, and I want you to know that too. So the book is called Tinnitus, From Tyrant to Friend, How to Let Go of the Ringing in Your Ears by Julian Cowan Hill. I would really recommend it. So I went back to the hospital a few times and really found that over that period, this earpiece was helping. More lately now, what I'm trying to do is use the earpiece at night time. Now, that doesn't fit with the advice of the woman. There was a couple of things she said and did that I didn't agree with. So one was, she said it was nonsense that alcohol and sugar and things like that make tinnitus worse. For me, they absolutely do. There's no doubt about it. I'll be sitting not even thinking about it, and right now it's a bit louder, and that's because I had quite a salty lunch. So sugar, salt, and alcohol all trigger it. So I didn't think about it at lunchtime, just ate the food, and now I'm much more aware of it. However, I no longer panic when I hear it, because I know that I will become unaware of it again. And that's a massive psychological step, is accepting that there will be times when you hear it and it doesn't have to stop the world going round. Like I said, I would even go to say that it's actually in some respects louder than it was last year, which if you told me last year, I don't know what I'd have said, but I can cope fine. The reason I don't wear this during the day is that when I do notice it during the day, I don't panic, but I use this at night time. Now, her advice for nighttime was to have a noise on in the room, like the equivalent of air conditioning or a fan if you lived in a hot climate. I live in Edinburgh. This is a heat wave, which is really unusual just now. It's stunning outside, absolutely stunning, but that's very unusual. So we don't normally need fans and things like that outside. And also my poor husband, he tried really hard. He wanted to support me. And the idea is that you have a background noise on in the room that kind of mixes up with your tinnitus. And I can see that in principle that would work for some people. But my husband found it hard, and I didn't like it either. I'm not sure I've found an ideal way to do this, but I've gone from at the beginning not being able to sleep and literally crying my eyes out like torture all night. I even was on sleeping tablets for a few weeks because I was getting so tired, but I didn't want to be on those for very long. And what I do now is I go to sleep listening to, so I have a couple of apps on my phone. I know there are quite a few apps you can get, but I have a couple of apps on my phone. And the two that I've got are called WHIST, W-H-I-S-T, and Oticon, O-T-I-C-O-N. And I have another one called Sleep Genius, but I don't really use that. The one that I use most is Oticon. I paid for Sleep Genius that I don't really use. The other two were free. Now on Oticon, when you go onto it, it offers you a few options, but the most useful option for me is that it offers what's called relief sounds. So you can see on the menu here, relief sounds. And if I switch into relief sounds, I've practiced with all of these sounds. So there's beach, campfire, birds, creek, forest, etc. The one that works best for me is pink sound. Now that sounds awful, and if you're at the beginning of your tinnitus just now, you're going to be thinking, oh no, my goodness, like that's awful. But actually, what I do is I play that very, very low, like very low, in the room. And if I want it in the room, that's what I do. I can have that on very low. If I want it, and the woman wouldn't advise this, but I do use it, I use just an earbud, you know, normal plug-in earphones, just one in one ear so I can sleep on the other. And again, I have it very low. But actually, what I found works best is saving this, not having it during the day, because the batteries are quite expensive and the NHS is paying for the batteries, and I don't like to use the NHS's money unnecessarily. But I will use that at night time as well to sleep. Now, the reason I do all that is not just to get to sleep, but the bit that I find the most difficult is when you wake up in the middle of the night, which we all do naturally. You know, we wake up once or twice in the middle of the night. That's the time I find the hardest. I wake up, and instead of just turning back to sleep, I hear what I can hear now, which is a high-pitched screech in both of my ears. Now, given that, like many of you, I'm sure I have a challenging life in other respects, just that's life, you know, life is normal, comes with challenging things. So my mind then goes mad, and the tinnitus just feels like too much to bear. So the reason I've started wearing this at night time is when I wake up and hear this sound on top of the high-pitched thing, I've been able to train myself to think, don't panic, just listen to this, and in the morning you'll be okay again. And actually that's been working just fine. So just looking at my list to see if there's anything else I meant to share with you. I don't think so, and I don't want to make it too long. I just want to say to you, I am an example of someone whose life was in a very challenging place when this started off, whose life continues to be in a challenging place, as many people's lives are. That's life. Adding tinnitus on top of that made me feel dreadful. I was in a truly terrible place. And here I am now. Right now I have no ear thing in my ears. It is ringing in my ears, and I am fine. It's like a background noise. Like, I don't know if you can hear the birds tweeting as well. I've just accepted it as a background noise. Sometimes it upsets me when I'm tired, and when bad stuff happens, it just feels so unfair. But the vast majority of the time, I can ignore it during the day, most of the day, and at the times that it's unignorable, like after I've eaten food usually, I can stay calm and recognise that it will go into the background again. And I don't think it's that it goes into the background, I think that I psychologically put it in the background. And I have managed to develop a strategy for night times, which I find the most difficult, that does work, and I no longer go to bed going, oh no, oh no. Push to see an audiologist, get the thing for your ear, and just know it's not going to kill you. And like all the other background noises that you tune out unconsciously at all times of day and night, with a bit of effort and a bit of belief, you can make your tinnitus go there too. I'd be happy to contact anyone if you'd like to, if you think it would be helpful. My email is annemacnab@bluyonder, BLUEYONDER.co.uk, if you think I can help. And buy yourself Julian's book. And I've never met or communicated with Julian, but thanks, Julian, you saved me.